A very good morning to you on this mighty Monday morning. It's the 28th, 26th rather, 2 days ahead, 26th of May. And if you've reached us, you are on the fifth connection, where we are talking through the storyline of the letter that Paul wrote to the Philippians. Stories are important because stories draw us into the telling. And a story is what sets the stage for the performance of how ideas, which are sentences, how they perform on the platform where they live. Because words work according to where they live. And that's why stories are so significant, because we can identify with the characterization of the persons in the story and the events, as well as all of the emotion that goes with it. So we want to continue right along in terms of the story here, because what the writer does is the writer is going to talk us through now in verse number 16. He's going to talk to us very beautifully from verse 15 onwards, the importance of. Said that the book has to do with this thing, mindfulness, where the focus is strategic, because when we love, we become strategic, intentional. So mindfulness inspires connections. There is vital relationality when we connect with one another. And then there is modal cruciformity. Our thinking gets ignited. And in the previous episodes, we looked at what the meta mind looks like. The mind of Christ is the meta mind. And God teaches believers who are followers of the way. Followers of the way are to imbibe this meta mind. They are to become meta-systemic. They are not to get caught and become egoically attached to ideology, idolatries of ideas, systematics, as we call it. We call it by a very big descriptor, systematic theology. We aren't given to systemics, even though we're born right into it, and we have to do battle with it until the day we drop. And that's what chapter 3 is going to talk us through. The danger of ideological possession. The danger of becoming ideologically possessed. So we've talked through verse number 12 through verse 14. Now we are going to talk through verse 15. Because in this section of the text, what the writer is going to get at is that our knowing, our getting to know, if knowledge is a drop, ignorance is an ocean. So we are constantly getting to know stuff, but in all humility, the more we get to know, the more we realize we don't know. And so the thinking of followers of the way, we're going to look at this morning, how their thinking is embedded. Thinking is embedded. Now, where in the world do we get that from? Well, verse 15 says that you followers of the way may be blameless and innocent. Here's the idea of being untainted. You're blameless and innocent because you are focusing on transformative impact. Not just to change your world, but first of all, to change. That very, very well-known person, Mahatma Gandhi, said, be the change you want to see. And what a biblical idea. Not that he spawned the idea, The idea has been buried in God's creation. It's all over God's creation. We are untainted. We make untainted transformative impact. Why? Because we are children of God. As Acts 17:25-28 says, we are his offspring. In him we live and move and have our being. We are children of God without blemish. So we are in the company of the progressing. We're not perfect, but we are blameless, innocent, and without blemish. We are untainted in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. There it is. We have our thinking, our knowing is embedded. It's not only embodied in the believing community as a corporate entity in solidarity with what we are and who we are. Knowing is not only embodied, it's embedded inside of a social niche, a socio-cultural niche. What's that socio-cultural niche? The midst of a crooked and twisted generation. That's how Paul defines the social context. Crooked and twisted. We live in a world nothing short of that. When we think of where we are postured as followers of the way in our own country, South Africa, on this 26th day of May, it's a Monday morning, and all the sagas we have been through because two political powers have been parlaying. They have been flexing their political muscle, one against the other against the one. And we saw that in the Oval Office last week. It was a delegation from our own country. And to think of all the stuff, soos ons sê in Afrikaans, die goed wat ons kwyt geraak het, is quite nauseating. We live in a day where corruption has infected our culture. It's shot through with fraud and corruption. Its laws are now favoring a particular political race group. And I use the word race very broadly because there's only one race, the human race. And within that, about 140 laws are favoring one particular grouping. And so, yes, the context we live in is crooked and twisted. It's a lost world. And as our untainted transformative impact hits a lost world, watch how it is to hit and engage with and encounter that socio-cultural context. It's a twisted and crooked generation among whom you as people of the way, the corporate gathering, the assembly, you shine as lights in the world. What does light do? Light dispels darkness. I remember as kids, we lived right next to a farming area, very bushy, forested area, many cars would wander through that section, and we loved lifting up the stones in the fields, in the veld. The moment you would lift a stone, you have the light flood into the darkness under that stone, and the little creatures scurry. Well, when light floods in, guess what happens? People scurry because they can't stand the impact of those who are untainted. Those in their being are untainted, because those are the ones in verse 60 now who are going to show what they are becoming. So you move from being, we actually move from doing in verse number 14. We are doing all things without murmuring and grousing and grumbling. In a sense, we are speechless in that area. But we are to be and we are to become. Doing, being, and becoming. Verse 15 is about being untainted as children in the midst of God's children in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. But now the beauty in verse number 16. Watch what we are doing as children of the light in particular. Watch what our function is. This verse talks about extended knowing. What are we doing as an extension of ourselves? We are holding fast to the word of life. That's extended knowing. You have an arm as a human being, you have a hand, unless you've had amputation. You have a hand, and then you have a hammer in your hand. Your hammer extends your knowing ability because now in an embodied, embedded, extended way, the hammer extends your arm or your hand. And the hammer is able to do what your fingers can't do. Can you pull out a nail embedded in a plank? If the nail is 3 inches deep and it's 2 inches in, can you pull it out with your bare hand and your fingers? No, you use a hammer. It extends your hand. And so holding fast the word of life in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, a lost world, we extend our knowing. And we do it so that in the day of Christ, Paul says, I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. His great concern was that his efforts out in the vineyard, out in the field, out in service for God, out in the workaday world, impacting the lives of a few at a place called Philippi, that would have a spillover effect into the context where those people lived. So that in the day of Christ, the story says, I, Paul, may be proud that I did not run or labor for nothing. That my efforts were embraced by you. You imbibed them. Because he has just come out of verse 1 to verse 11, explaining what the humbled mind exalted looks like. What the humbled self exalted looks like. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. It was a mindset, a self-set that went to the cross, a person who went to the cross, left heaven's glory, was not sated or egoically attached to what he had and what he was, but let it go in order to impact the lives of others, in other words, to cause them to be able to salvage all of their life, to see all of their life salvaged, not just some of it. And so verse 12 to verse 14 talks about embodied knowing. Verse 15 talks about embedded knowing. And verse 16 talks about extended knowing, holding fast to the word of life. And so we need to understand our crucial function in the world in which we live. When we think about knowing, we think about an area of science called cognitive science. And if you're familiar with 4E cogzi, or 4E, or even 7E cognitive knowing, in the cognitive science. Cognitive science has to do with how the brain works. And that area of neuroscience is so fascinating. A while ago, I finished Ian McGilchrist's book entitled The Matter with Things, a 3,000 pager, volume 1, volume 2. I read it all. That doesn't mean I understood it all, but it was captivating reading. Hundreds upon hundreds of pages of research that brings to light how our minds work. And I've used that research to show that what the text is talking about here is that in verse 1 to verse 11 of Philippians 2, our minds are postured in humility. There's a particular posture of mind that gets us to imbibe the things of God. And then we see that the macro mind, verse 12 to verse 18, which builds off of the meta-mindedness, the posture that we have. And there's a pattern that comes off of that macro mind, which is dying and living. Dying to live. In this section is about dying to think, and dying to think properly. Because God moves us from order to disorder to reordered lives, right? The way up in God's economy is down. And the flip side of the same coin of transformation is, one side is down and up. He takes us down before he takes us up. That's what happened to Jesus. He humbled himself before he was highly exalted, as we would say, glorified, given the highest place at the right hand of the Father. And then we're going to see not only the postured mind and the pattern mind, but the portrayed mind in the life of real men whose lives pictured and stood as examples of this meta mind, which goes and moves into the macro mind, and now it moves into the meso mind. And in chapter 3, from verse 1 onwards, Paul is going to show how macro-minded he was in his focus in dying to live well and to think well. Because living well has to do with thinking well. Or have you not asked somebody, how are you doing today? How are you today? I'm well. Because one well-being has to do with thinking, speaking, feeling, and listening well. And so we see in the biblical text that God has already spoken about these issues. That to be meta-minded has to do with understanding what the micro mind looks like, which is the pattern that builds off of what God did in Jesus Christ on Calvary's cross. So today you're going to have wonderful opportunities again. Opportunities where you're going to be called on to pattern in your thinking what dying to think is all about. Because thinking well has to do with going through this fractal pattern. Life, death, resurrection. Order, disorder, reorder. And we have to die to old ways of thinking because we are so ideologically locked because of the culture we live in. And to break out of those ideologies is very, very difficult. That's why we need to be empowered by the Spirit. And so this morning you're going to face opportunities where you can extend your impact, extend your knowing into the work circle, into your domestic circle, into your marital circle, into your parenting style, to see applied to the lives of others what has been applied to your life. If you want to see your kids change, your wife change, your workmates change, you need to experience transformative change in your own life. You need to move from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And that process will be nothing short of trauma for you. Because God's creation is so rich that he uses suffering and pain. So rich that he uses suffering and pain to get us there. It's part of the deal. Philippians 1:27. Unto you it has been granted as a privilege not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for his sake. Believing loyalty. Continue believing. That's one privilege. Another one is sacrificial suffering. Believing loyalty drives us. Sacrificial suffering draws us to be what he has called us to be. I trust that as you go with God today, your own heart will be encouraged to live for him in a crooked and a twisted, a real world context. Go with God. Goodbye for now.